Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Jazz is Not What You Think, the podcast that delves deep into the world of jazz with your host, Michael Fagan. In this episode of Jazz is Not What You Think, we embark on a melodic journey with the exceptionally talented clarinetist, saxophonist, and composer, Hillai Govreen. But before we dive in, we'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, the Jazziz Vinyl Club. Picture this, jazz aficionados. As a member of the Jazziz Vinyl Club, you'll receive not one, not two, but 4 premium edition 180-gram vinyl albums carefully curated by the Jazziz editors. These albums feature tracks from jazz legends and today's top artists handpicked just for you. And here's the cherry on top. These vinyl gems will be delivered to your doorstep 4 times a year. It's like Christmas for jazz lovers all year round. But wait, there's more. Each vinyl album comes complete with liner notes penned by Jazziz writers, offering you a deeper dive into the music and the artist behind it. And let's not forget the custom design album cover that makes these vinyl albums true collector's items. So if you're ready to enrich your jazz collection with the finest tunes and exclusive vinyls, look no further than the Jazziz Vinyl Club. It's the club where music lovers and vinyl enthusiasts unite. This is Jazz Is Not What You Think.
Hillai, how are you? Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I've been listening to your latest album with Nitsan, and I can tell, and I know you've described this before, it's a musical exploration that tells stories through music. And most people probably don't know that the definition of illusion. And I'm sure you carefully picked that as the title of your album because
Right.
it does have that quality in that it says something without actually having to say something. There's references in your music to stories. And tell us about that, how that came about, how you connected with Nitsan to put this album together.
Right. So Nitsan and I met now a few years ago already. We went to school together in Tel Aviv and then at the new school. And then when we graduated, the pandemic started, and I know there's been a lot of pandemic music, but um, that really was like how it started because we were both in New York and everything shut down, and we just meet each other and play together, and read books and watch movies, and that was sort of the inspiration. So it was so that's how it came together, and then it was almost like we had all these different fables and stories and films that we watched together, and those were came in through the music. So there's a whole like macro structure for that album, and then um, like themes that come back in different ways, and different literary inspirations. So yeah, thanks for noticing that.
Yes, absolutely. And so you play clarinet and saxophone, and
Right.
the interpersonal sort of musical relationship that you have with Nitsan is very intricate and very delicate.
Mhm.
And there's this sort of musical language that takes place. Um, do you think because you've known each other for a while that happened, or you just have some sort of music connection because of your training and working together?
Mm. Yeah. Well, the way I see it, music is very much connected to life, and it's so it starts with the relationship you have with a person, and often it's if it's a friendship or if it's thing that comes out in the music, and we're very good friends. And then also definitely, like, the more we played together, the more we explored, and we had an interesting process of composing together, which is something that I can't do with most people.
Hmm.
But then, I'd start an idea and I'd bring it, we'd workshop it together. He'd bring something and we worked on it and played it and changed things. So the revision of the composition was a very big part of that album. And yeah, so if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you graduated from the new school. Do you stay in touch with them since you're in New York? Do you do any classes or things?
Oh.
Seminars?
Well, I just ran into Keller, the dean in the
Hmm.
street. He lives a few blocks away from me, so I was walking with Nitsan, and we just came we walked into him. But well, I did stay. Well, my teacher, my private teacher I studied with at New School is Chris Cheek, and he moved to
Hmm.
Europe. So
Hmm.
I'm in touch with him a little bit by emails. He sends me sometimes like etudes and just like things he finds um, about orchestration and all kinds of stuff like that. And then another person I stayed in touch with is Steve Cardenas. He
Hmm.
taught me the monk
Sure.
ensemble,
Mhm.
and since then we played a few times together. So that was really fun. Thinking who else I stayed in touch with.
And the
Yeah,
reason I ask that is the interesting thing about jazz and the kind of music that you perform and record.
mhm,
Um, you learned it through musical teachings and relationships that you have, and sort of in the jazz world, I see something that we don't really see in other musics as much, and that is you learn it, you play it, other people get inspired, you teach them.
mhm,
It's sort of like student becomes teacher. So someone out there is going to listen to your album and say, I love that. I want to do that.
mhm.
And and that's why I asked that question. Um, and the interesting thing that I see with your music, which is I was doing some research on wonderfully young, talented people coming from Israel, and I was mesmerized by the quality and quantity of musicians coming from Israel. I mean, we
Right.
all know, Anat and certainly, Avishai, but I was introduced to dozens of, excuse me, musicians from Israel I'd never heard of. I listened to their music and I said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible." And so, why do you think that is so? Why do you? I know there's the connection where a lot of Israelis come to New York. They basically go to the great music institutions to learn, and then they move on. But we're starting to see a lot. I think I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm starting to
Mhm.
see a lot more of that.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've been asked that a few weeks ago. For they did this thing on the Jerusalem Post about Israeli jazz musicians, and I don't know. It's almost like a random thing because it's not part of the historical heritage
Right. Right.
of Israel, and it's definitely not a mainstream art form. It's not like you
Mhm.
walk around Israel, and I mean, in New York, there's a lot more jazz than in Israel.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I do think that because it's a small community, then the people who were in New York and come back often teach this. Like there's a small group of people who are exchanging and learning from each other. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I actually reached out to the AICF, a woman named Galia Barkal,
Mhm.
and it's an organization that actually is for musicians that come from Israel.
Right. I think I got a few scholarships from them in the past, I think. If
Wonderful
it's the
organization,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
and
they also classical music and also jazz, they
yes, yes,
fund a lot of yeah, yeah.
and I'm just I'm mesmerized, like I said, with the
Mhm.
number and the quality of music coming from Israel for a country that's not known for jazz.
Right.
But then again, in this new day and age with our digital connectivity, I mean, I'm learning about artists from Serbia and from places in China I've never heard of. So I guess that may be part of it.
Right.
the,
And then, there's
the
YouTube today, so you could get
yes,
the best influences. Just
yeah, oh, absolutely.
yeah.
So one of the things that when you and I first started communicating
Mhm.
via email is that we're doing this special women leader issue where it's just women around the world, and it literally from every corner of the world, where we search to find some very talented people.
Mhm.
And that for me and in a male-dominated industry, recording industry, live music, media, um, I wanted to search and find recording artists, performing artists that weren't necessarily the ones that everyone knows already, that
Mhm.
are not only deserving of presentation to a larger audience, but in finding out more about these recording and performing artists. And what I learned through the process, being again a male, is that the sort of stereotypes, the inequality, the inequity that we see in this male dominated industry is pervasive. I'm optimistic that it's changing, but I was wondering, you're very young, and
Right.
um, even on your journey so far, what are some trials and tribulations that you've experienced being a woman? And were you given the same opportunities, or was it more difficult for you being a woman and a jazz artist?
Mhm. Right. So I'd say that when I was when I was 18 and I was in the school in Israel, I found that to be challenging, not just because I'm a woman, just because I came from classical background, so um, I had certain advantages, but also a lot of disadvantages, or just like just took me longer to learn the language and to become a part of that. And then also in school, I think I might have been the only instrumentalist. I mean, there were a few vocalists,
Mhm,
but uh, so just that. And then there was one teacher, Anat Fort, who taught, and the rest were males. So that just in terms of the environment, I felt often uncomfortable, just because
mhm,
um, I don't experience the same thing here in New York. I think there's so many great women musicians and instrumentalists, and a lot of them taught me at school, and a lot of them playing all over the city. And um I don't experience it in the same way.
mhm,
um Sometimes if you're talking to people who do booking or venue owners, that could get uh difficult sometimes, just with certain sexist comments or thing. But I do feel it's changing, and I think um there's definitely more awareness uh
mhm.
right now, yeah. And
Well,
I'm just and I try to just focus on the music. I mean,
mhm,
I'm not a feminist activist, or or a researcher. I mean, I'm a musician, so I try to put all my energy in that, and in like learning more every day, and just going deep into the music as much as I can.
well, you did it with this album for sure, and it's a really beautiful project. I've listened to it over and over again. I actually, of all the track, recall that we're putting a shorter track from your album on the compilation for Jazziz for everyone to
Oh,
hear.
yes.
Uh, I think that is the title Manfort. Um,
Mancourt, yeah.
Mancourt.
Yeah.
Just absolutely, it was the one track when I was listening. When I'm listening to music, I'm sure you do the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, you listen and you try to see what's the first movement or track that kind of moves you, or you feel something. Oh, that was a really nice change. That was really beautiful transition. And that was the track that did it for me, even though it's one of the shorter tracks on the album.
Oh,
Of course,
wow. Yeah,
I
it's
love
one
the.
of the short ones, but it is definitely the theme, and it's based off the book. It's a type of it's based off the book that we both read, The Day Lasts More Than 100 Years.
Mm,
Um, and it's about torture in Kazakhstan for prisoners of for like it's a pretty horrible
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
actually. But
But it's a kind of a haunting melody,
yeah.
but it's also beautiful at the same time. And that's why I asked, can we use that track? Because that really moved me.
I'm happy it moved you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, again, you are selected as one of the women that leaders that, even though you're so young, and I say that not in any deference to young people aren't talented or worthy of coverage, but it's so nice to see young women in jazz. And being young, who are some of you mentioned before that maybe you had a little bit of an advantage growing up now as opposed to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Who are some
Right.
of your women mentors?
Hmm. I'd say that definitely. I mean, you mean people who I know, who I
People who
or
you
just
either listen,
generally musicians.
people who you may know or you were inspired by them.
Oh, okay. So in terms of inspiration, one of my biggest inspiration is Jerry Ellen. Jerry Ellen, I really love her music and her compositions, her arrangements, her playing, everything about her. I really like.
Mhm.
And then I'd say in terms of women mentorships, my first teacher in Israel was really big influence on my life. She's pianist and musicologist,
Mhm.
Tanya. And then I studied with Anat Cohen, who was also an amazing musician and clarinet player, and um, so she was one of my teachers. What else would I say is um, I mean, I
How
love
about,
Maria Schneider.
of course, how
Yeah,
about outside of jazz? What kind of music do you like? What
outside
kind of
of
music
jazz.
do you listen to?
Oh, outside of jazz. Well, I listen to everything. I really like. I wouldn't say. I'm thinking like recently. I don't know. I've been listening to this Michael Jackson album
Well,
recently.
and it's a loaded question. The reason I ask it is because growing up today as a
Mhm.
young musician, and I've been in this business for 50 years.
Mhm.
And what I've noticed is that you have access. You mentioned YouTube. You have
Right.
access to music that was much more difficult to get access to, certainly
Mhm.
when I was growing up, but even 20 years ago.
Right.
And so what I see, which is really interesting, is that a lot of young jazz artists, they are exposed to and influenced by music outside of jazz, even though their primary
Right.
focus is jazz. And
Mhm.
the, the sort of corollary to that is I also see that there are a lot of great pop, wouldn't say necessarily, yeah, pop and rock, more popular music that
Mhm.
is influenced by some of the younger jazz players who are more open to music outside of jazz, whether it's a
Right.
Jacob Collier, uh,
Mm.
where
Pedro
they
Martins even would say.
absolutely, and so
Yeah.
you're starting to see that sort of integration of other musical forms by young musicians, young jazz musicians who are fortunate to have the exposure to a lot of other musics to say, oh, I could
Right.
see where I could do something with that, still keep it
Right.
jazz, but bring in other elements to it, kind of like the fusion movement did back in the
Yeah,
70s.
I very much relate to that because I never just listen to one thing or listen to just jazz, and I have all kinds of different influences, and I feel like any experience you have can have a footprint if it actually impacts you. So I have a lot of different influences, and it could be rock, and it could be Brazilian music, and it could be impressionist music and baroque, and there's
Yeah,
different things, and they find their way together
yeah.
in a natural way, I'd say.
Yes, yes, not
Yeah.
forced. It's something
Not
you hear
forced.
something. I remember there was this album out years ago by a really talented artist. You probably never heard of him. His name is Paul Haley. And
Paul.
there was this one song that it was all the Paul Winter consort and all that kind of movement, and there was really talented bunch of artists that were doing that thing. And
Mhm.
he did an album that had this really cool, like almost African gospel in the background with this classical thing in the foreground. And he
Wow.
explained it to me how they came up with that, in that when they were making the music, there was a church next door. And while they were recording this movement, they could hear the gospel and this beautiful music coming from the church. And it was like a light bulb went off and said, this works great together. And so
Wow.
I kind of see a
Yeah.
digital version of that happening today with young
Yeah.
musicians.
There's the Mitch, the owner of Ornithology. He
Mhm.
listens to two different albums at the same time. He sits in the basement and he has two speakers playing like completely different.
I have ADD. I could never do that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Hillai, it was absolutely wonderful to meet you. I wish
Wonderful
you
to
the
meet you too,
most
and thank
success
you
on
so
this
much for
record.
including me in this, podcast you're doing. It's been
And you'll
nice
be
talking
there's
to
a
you.
there, and in the print quarter that comes out, there's going to be a beautiful 2-page spread of you and Nitsan, and you're featured on the compilations that come with the magazine. So there's going to be a lot of you in the coming months in Jazziz, and I'm sure everyone's going to enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and let's stay in touch. You have my
Stay
number
in
if you ever
touch.
need to reach me.
Okay, great. Yeah.
All right, take care. Have a
Bye, have
wonderful
a good
day.
day.
All right, you too. Bye bye.